Hello folks, and welcome to this little historical account of my favourite boyhood playground. I love history, and Hollywood has a wealth of it, but I've been digging only into the supposed facts and finding issues. So in this slideshow, I'll enter some long-running, possibly long-forgotten debates, along with my thoughts on Murphy's Field and the Motte. Here we have a modern aerial view of Murphy's Field with its motte hidden by trees. In the 1950s, I lived dead opposite the main entrance to what was my own personal Narnia. I played marbles inside and outside the gateway, football in the field, cowboys and Indians or soldiers at war around the motte, and catch and kiss with local girls if you could find where they'd hidden. I am talking of when I was in the age group of between 6 and 11, so it was all very innocent. In a damp and dark winter, my best pal and I would see which of us would be the most courageous to walk the furthest up Murphy's heavily tree-lined driveway and back again without running for our lives. However, what you see here is not the same as in my time. Here I've overlaid the site with my layout as I remember it. I knew every square foot of the ground and almost every tree and bush. I climbed most of them. Now there are only 2 left of the 4 I knew at the gateway, and the scary driveway has sadly long gone. And here's the site in all its glory. How different it was. For there was what I prefer to call the Friary. Most folk called it the monastery, but I'll come to that later, for it was a grand but old, tired and much neglected house and grounds by the local authorities. For now though, this is the only photograph of the original gateway, and exactly as I knew it, although the photo dates from 1936, a few years before I arrived, except that the iron gates had long disappeared by then, probably removed for wartime recycling. For me, it's heartbreaking to witness the result of what I believe to be local authority vandalism. I'm grateful to my friend Tom for allowing me to use stills from his earlier video, in which he gives an excellent account of his visit. For here, the current entrance to Brook Street shows the motte, but not as I knew it, as right up to the yellow line is all infill, which can be seen to cover what was the base or first tier of the motte. And I have to ask, why would they do that? And why would they put in new steps when the earlier wooden steps further round, although rotten, could simply have been replaced? To me, removing or totally altering a section of history for no obvious reason is just a legalised form of vandalism. In this slide, for example, we are looking back towards the entrance where the Friary once stood, and you can see how the ground level has been raised, due, I suspect, using the spoil from the Friary's demolition. From the same viewpoint, Tom describes what looks like a gully as the probable watercourse for a moat. Not an unreasonable assumption, given the false high ground on which he is standing. However, there was never a gully there, because the ground rose gradually from Church Road at more or less equal level with Brook Street. Now, looking in the direction of Brook Street, we can clearly see where the level has been changed. To the right, and on the first 2 tiers, I have marked where the old wooden steps were in the 50s. The cleft with a question mark did not exist, so what was done here is relatively new. What is really significant here is that you can see 4 tiers. I know of no account that states there were 4 tiers, but arguments have gone on for many years for 3 tiers versus 4. I know there were 4 because I clambered up and down them more times than I've had on breakfasts. And indeed there are still 4. Funny that the so-called experts seem to have ignored that little anomaly. We now come to 2 slightly more contentious issues. The first being whether the motte had a spiral pathway, or as it's been for many, many years, concentric. The second issue is whether there was a moat. Here we see a 1901 map and a 1919 map. The earlier one shows a spiral path and 3 tiers, even though we know there were 4. The later map also shows a 3-tiered motte. In my mind, this is map planning not done correctly. Both maps show the Twistle River, which I've coloured blue. The Twistle on most maps goes underground before reaching Brook Street and rises again by Sullivan Street. Water can't flow uphill, so the obvious conclusion is that there was no moat. And as I said earlier, the ground rises from Church Road, and there is no evidence to suggest how they might have managed to get the water up to the motte. The Burn River on the later map also obviously flows downhill and follows its natural course, a long way from the motte. You can check the benchmarks to reach your own estimate of the motte level. I've given mine in the next slide. In this slide, and you may wish to pause with each insert, I've given a brief synopsis of conflicting information, but placing my own personal experience above what the supposed experts have stated, and supported by my own research. When I discovered the Queen's University survey report, I felt I had no option but to send them all the information I had, and which refuted some of the claims they made, since they seemed to have resorted to conjecture rather than logic. They did not ask the same question I asked: what would have been the purpose of changing a spiral path to concentric? But no, they stuck to a rather stupid, in my opinion, hypothesis that has no foundation. I've drawn the old friary, the basement nursery, the fountains, and the statue as I remember them. The section shown is one of the pages I sent Queen's University, but sadly they did not respond. From the 5 segments I've shown here, there is so much that was wrong about this survey, such as number 1, the reliance and interpretation on mapping, and I haven't yet come to the map they produced. Number 2, the evidence for lack of evidence, and the lack of solid evidence to make a determination. Thus we get mindless conjecture. Number 3, the idea of a moat was not in their brief, but could have proven the purpose of the motte. Was it for worship or defence? With no evidence for a moat possible, my money would be on the likelihood of an early monastic site rather than a defensive structure. Number 4, my map plan of the building must have had something similar in the records office, apparent from the dig location. After all, they did find the steps. Number 5, was it so difficult to associate the steps with a building on a prominent site? My conclusion is that this was an entirely shoddy survey when you read the report, for it tells us nothing we didn't already know, and some things that are totally worthless, even false. It's only my opinion, but I find that a rather damning indictment of incompetency. I drew these images in 2010 to send to Queen's to add to as well as refute some of their findings. You can see them by their report by going to the address that I've given. I find it odd that they date the survey as taking place in 2005, yet the report is dated 2004. Very strange. They say that they consulted a local historian, but it's curious that he never mentioned the Friary, otherwise known as Silverton House, the house, the fountains, or the statue. Perhaps he never visited to note them. They claim that the survey was an experiment, but in my opinion, my estimation, not a very good one. And so we come to the last but one slide. But for some reason, the archaeological department at Queen's doesn't like to date the maps they use, which is very unprofessional. However, above and once again, this map shows a three-tiered motte with a spiral pathway, the extension of which was not there in the 1950s, since the Friary was situated there. So in fact, this is mainly a map of how the site looks today. Yet still they can't count the correct number of tiers. Why have they got it as a spiral, when it's clearly concentric? There is also a further error, as the orientation of the motte is not as it was. Maybe someone turned the map round when no one was looking. I remember the oval as running north to south, just as it is today. But here, they have it east to west. What they've actually done is to combine two different eras in one map with an added error. The final QEB photo is the usual photo of the motte with, you've guessed it, 3 tiers, at least in part. I have one other question to ask. Why has no one photographed the motte from the front? The viewpoint that most people knew, and importantly, with its 4 tiers and 3 concentric paths in full view. Some viewers may think that I've been unfair to Queen's University, but I only put forward the facts as I knew and experienced them, then later did my researches. Almost every day of my childhood was spent in Murphy's Field, and I knew every square foot of it, for it was my place of seclusion, a virtual home from home where I could escape and do my own things, with and without my nearest pals. Queen's chose to use one of many other maps available, but certainly one that conveniently supported their hypothesis. They claimed to have identified a section of spiral path, but did not show it. And how does one identify a spiral path, if there was such a thing, from a tiny test section? In truth, the survey was an amateurish failure, and the regeneration of the site shameful. The Queen's source of local information came from a local historian, who, it seems, didn't know very much. Either that, or he refrained from telling them. Whatever your thoughts, thank you so much for viewing. My sincere thanks to Tom Mcclean, Positive Belfast, for hosting this little piece of Hollywood as I knew it.